This is my favorite time of the year, guys. Conference Championship weekend. The cream rises to the top, and we finally get the playoffs set. In this video, I'm going to be going over all 9 Conference Championship games, giving you an in-depth breakdown, and ultimately showing you who will win each game based off of the matchups. We'll start out with the MAC. Going through the group of 5 first, very quickly. We have Miami, Ohio, taking on the Ohio Bobcats. In this game, the resumes, not too much. The strength of skills is pretty weak. Miami's only faced Ohio State. That's a only really tough game. Everybody else, Ohio has not faced many tough opponents either. They're 9-0 versus Tier 4, but they have 0-3 versus anybody Tiers 1 through 3. So, in this game will basically be defense, defense, defense. Both are in the top 20 of total defense, scoring defense as well. The in-depth breakdown shows that even though Ohio has an advantage in the points allowed a minute, the possessions reach the red zone for their opponent, and the amount of touchdowns they allow in the red zone, Miami, Ohio also has an advantage in the yards per play allowed, adjusted yards points allowed per minute, and they're second in a passing yards per attempt, as well as they're 30th in the amount of turnovers they force per possession, while Ohio is very, very low, and they turn the ball over way more than Miami does. And I think that's going to be the reason why Miami, Ohio is a 2.5-point favorite. Not only wins this, but covers as well and wins the MAC. Moving on to the Conference USA Championship, we have Jacksonville State taking on Western Kentucky. Big Red against another Big Red, the Gamecocks. This game, again, resumes for these group of 5 is not going to be too important because they played very weak strength of schedule. As you can see, Jacksonville State's 127th strength of schedule played. I mean, Western Kentucky's not much better at 96, but they also played one more Tier 2 opponent than Jacksonville State did. Either way, this game, just like last, will be kind of opposite. It'll be about the offense. Jacksonville State's scoring and rushing offense versus Western Kentucky's passing offense. Both are not too good in defense, and both rated outside the top 80 in scoring, passing, and rushing as well. So the matchup here, the breakdown, only thing that really favors the Big Red is the passing yards per attempt of 27th, while Jacksonville State gives up their 90th in allowing that. Meanwhile, their passing rush, they don't allow many sacks, and they don't throw many interceptions, while Jacksonville State does not sack or cause much interceptions. That is their only disadvantage of this game. Yards per play, their red zone, the percentage of possessions with the red zone touchdown, the rushing yards per attempt. I think they have a running back who's 5th in the nation in rushing touchdowns, as well as their adjusted yards added per rush. And finally, the turnovers forced per possession. All these favor Jacksonville State. All these do not favor Western Kentucky. And that's why, as a 4-point favorite, I think Jacksonville State will cover this and win their first ever Conference USA Championship in only the second year in FBS. But moving on to the Sun Belt, the Fun Belt Championship, Louisiana at 10-2 taking on Marshall at 9-3. So a pretty decent matchup here for the group of 5 teams. Again, I have to stress that these two teams, these group of 5 schedules are not strong at all, and the team with the weaker schedule is obviously favored. Louisiana has 126th versus Marshall's 94th, so both really weak. Not too much to say about the resumes. Again, offense is really good in this game. Louisiana is 18th in total offense, 15th in scoring, 7th in passing, 19th in rushing, while Marshall is 27th in rushing and 29th in passing defense. So the only advantage that I see here from Marshall is on their passing defense, as well as their rushing offense. But that's where the disadvantages lie for Louisiana. Everything on them, yards per play, they're 4th. The percentage of possessions with points, they're 4th. Passing yards per attempt, they're 9th. And as well as possessions with a turnover, they did not turn the ball over much. They're 9th, while Marshall only is 49th in forcing a turnover on possessions. So I think with these minor issues for Marshall on defense and Louisiana being pretty good at rushing the football, I think the Raging Cajuns will keep the trend at every single team that's been a home game in the Sun Belt Championship winning. I think they keep that trend and win this one as a 5.5-point favorite. Moving on to the American Championship, the game that just 3 weeks ago had major CFP implications on the line. Army was undefeated, and Tulane only had no conference losses. Both are still undefeated. Since then, though, Army got crushed by Notre Dame, and Tulane had that bad loss last Friday night to Memphis, which basically put them from 22nd in the rankings to unranked. Army's still ranked, but as you can see here, their strength of schedule, 130th in the country. The only team they play that's been inside the top 80 has been Notre Dame, and everybody knows they got spanked in that one. Meanwhile, Tulane has played both Oklahoma on the road and Kansas State. Those are both two losses, but that home loss to Memphis last week, Tier 3 loss, that just absolutely deflated this team. And even though they clinched like 3 weeks ago, I don't know. I don't think they were looking ahead. Maybe they were, but Memphis was a good team. They finished with 10 wins, so I mean they just faced a buzzsaw at the wrong time. Tulane and Army both are really, really good offensively. They're 6th, 13th in offensive efficiency. Meanwhile, Tulane is actually 12th in total defense, while Army's 9th in total defense. Again, they're both really good on offense, pretty decent on defense as well. The in-depth stats, again, show that Army, again, we know that they're going to run the ball. They run a triple option, but this has been like a modified version of that, and their passing has actually been pretty decent this year. I mean, they're 2nd in yards per attempt, and they're 5th in they're actually 1st in passing attempts per interception. They don't throw the ball. Actually, they don't throw much, but they don't turn the ball over when they throw it either. So I mean, they're running the ball really effectively. They're 6th in yards per attempt and rushing. So that's been, for a team that runs it, I don't know how many times a game. I think they run it 79% of the time. That's pretty good for a triple option team. So that's why they've been able to sustain and get to 10-1. But at the same time, Tulane is 17th in yards per play, and their adjusted yards added per attempt. This is a mismatch here, because even though Army has the 6th most yards per attempt, they run the ball so much that anything, it's just kind of it's an inflated number. So, and as you can see right here, Tulane 2nd in possessions that reach the red zone. They're 4th in passing yards per attempt, and they're 5th best in defensive touchdown in the red zone. So I think what this game is ultimately going to come down to, though, is these stats are kind of even, but in the end, Army's played just such an easy schedule. All these are inflated because of their strength of schedule. And obviously we saw, like I said before, the one team they played that had even a heartbeat. I mean, Notre Dame's a top 5 team, don't get me wrong, but the one team they played that was actually good, they got spanked. And Tulane have been battle tested this year against Oklahoma, against Memphis, and against Kansas State. And because of that, only as a 4.5 point favorite on the road, I think Tulane's going to win this and win their 2nd American Championship in 3 years. Now, moving on to the 5 conferences that actually matter. These will be the 5 conference champs will be in the playoff. Starting off with Mountain West, the biggest Mountain West championship game in history. This is by far. The winner of this game will go to the CFP because both are ranked inside the top 20. Boise State is 10th and UNLV is 20th. So this game actually probably has the biggest implications of the playoff, because given that Arizona State and Iowa State are both ahead of UNLV playing for the Big 12 championship, one of those will have to win the game. And if UNLV were to win this, they would still be behind those teams. So Boise State wins, I think it's almost a given that right now they will be a top 4 seed. But if UNLV were to somehow upset Boise State, that means the Big 12 champ will move up to the 4th seed, and UNLV will claim that last spot in the 12th spot. So this game actually has, whether a Mountain West team is 4th or 12th, and whether the Big 12 team is 4th or 12th, will have a big, huge implication on the streak of some of these other conference games and their path to the national title game. So, resume-wise, Boise State is 85th in strength of schedule, but they did play Oregon. I mean, that three-point loss to them the second week of the season was really big for them. I would say they outplayed Oregon, but they were definitely equal to them that day. And their only other tier 2 game they played was this UNLV squad on the road. So that was a tough, really good, gritty win for them. They only won by 5. UNLV on the other hand is 115th strength of schedule. They had a bad loss. I wouldn't say a bad loss, but Syracuse power rated is outside the top 40. So that was an overtime loss at home. And if they would have won that game, this game would have bbeen 11-1 versus 11-1, and the stakes would have been that much higher. I think UNLV would have probably been inside the top 15. I wouldn't put them ahead of some of these 9-3 SEC teams, but probably top 16 kind of squad. And they, Boise State might have been fighting for that large bit. So who knows? Either way, this is the biggest matchup, like I said before, in the Mountain West history. mean, you can go over some of these like surface stats with offense and defense. Boise State obviously has Genty. He's a Heisman, one of the Heisman favorites. They can obviously run the hell out of the ball, but their scoring is third, while UNLV's scoring is seventh. So this is going to be a high-scoring game, I do believe, not a 29-24 kind of back and forth affair. This time it's at Boise State. They have the home field advantage. Where are their advantages and where's UNLV's advantages inside this game, a game within the game? I think for one, UNLV adjusted points a minute. They have a lot. They score a lot faster than Boise State does, even though Boise State still does have the third ninth most yards per play and the ninth most yards per minute. I think that Boise State's defense is that much worse than UNLV's. So I think it could be a back and forth affair. Given that both teams have a really good high power offense. And as you see here, the passing yards per attempt favors UNLV, while the pass rush, though, favors Boise State. They're second in pass rush rating. So, I mean, they're getting to the quarterback, and UNLV is, not allowing teams to get to the quarterback. So that could be an interesting matchup. But I do think, the biggest matchup, game inside the game, possessions with the turnover, they're both inside the top 6, while Boise State just does not force many turnovers here. So I think, analytically speaking, some of these stats do favor UNLV, but in the end here, I think the biggest one that matters is Boise State is 11th best in reaching the red zone, and they're 7th best in scoring a touchdown inside the red zone, while UNLV is outside the top 70 in allowing touchdowns, and they're 117th in getting a red zone touchdown. So if Boise State can just pound the rock, hold on to the ball, not allow UNLV to get many yards of play, not any fast hits, and if they score a touchdown, they get to the red zone and they score a red zone touchdown, Boise State's going to win this game again and claim this spot as a top 4 seed, get the 12-1, and be the Mountain West champion in 2024. Moving on to the Big 12 championship, like I said before, Arizona State and Iowa State both rated top 22 and analytically in the power ratings. The CFP has them 15 and 16, so again, they're going to be the 5th highest rated conference champ. If Boise State were to win, they'd be the 4th highest and get a bye if UNLV were to win. So stakes of this game are pretty high. Both have a tier 1 win. I think it was against, I have to see what the stats are first, but as you can see, many tier 2 and tier 3 games for Arizona State. Iowa State has 6 tier 2 games, so this Big 12, they've just cannibalized each other, and that's why they're only going to get one team in the playoffs this year. But Iowa State, they started off, 6-0 or 7-0 before back-to-back losses to Texas Tech and Kansas. I mean, they both hit those teams hitting a stride. Meanwhile, Arizona State had early losses to Texas Tech and a mid-season loss to Cincinnati. That was a head-scratcher looking back at it now. But they've won their last 5, including pretty good win over BYU and dominating their rival Arizona on the road. Iowa State rebounded well, got a big road win over Utah, and got a good win over Kansas State. That was their tier 1 win. So, I mean, who has the advantage of this game? The biggest advantage, I think, will come down to this. They're both pretty, above average to average in most stats, but I think the biggest advantage will be the rushing offense of Arizona State against Iowa State's rushing defense. And I think, as you can see, in-depth stats here, rushing yards per attempt, Arizona State's 52nd, while Iowa State is 112th in rushing yards per allow. They allow more than 5 yards a carry on the season. And as well as on the defensive side, Arizona State's rush offense and defense is greatly better than Iowa State's. They're 39th in defense, while Iowa State is 73rd. And the biggest one here, adjusted yards added per attempt. Iowa State just they don't get many extra yards, and they're just not good at rushing the football, which I think this is going to be a mismatch. If they can't run the ball, Arizona State is pretty good. They're 18th in passing yards per attempt, and they force the 11th most turnovers per possession. So if they cannot run the ball, Iowa State's going to have to throw it, and Iowa State just is not good at getting to their passer. They're good at yards per attempt, but they're just something about this just screams that they have to be able to establish a run, and I just don't feel like they will. I think Arizona State will be your Big 12 champion in 2024 and get that last spot in the CFP playoffs. Moving on to the ACC now, it is against Clemson, the breadwinner for the ACC for the past decade or so, against the first-year teams, SMU. I think all 4 Power 4 conferences have a first-year team in their conference title game. SMU is the one here for the ACC. They're 11-1. Clemson is 9-3. SMU comes in at 8th, while Clemson is 17th. So SMU still, I think, still has a chance to get the first round bye or a at-large bid if they were to lose. But Clemson obviously has to win this or they're out of the playoffs. So the resume-wise, SMU's played. These two teams actually played the two weakest strength of schedules in the entire ACC. So that's why you can kind of see why they're both at the tops there. SMU has one Tier 1 win. I do believe that was against Louisville on the road. Well, meanwhile, Clemson has played three Tier 1 teams, but they've not beaten their own 3 against all 3 of those. You'll see in the next slide here, the schedule. And they're pretty mid. They only played 2 Tier 2 games, and they played 7 teams in Tier 4, outside the top 75 in the analytical power rating. So they got crushed by Georgia week 1. They had that weird loss to Louisville at home midway through the season when they were just hitting their stride. And then just got upset by South Carolina, another surging team in the SEC. I mean, in between that, they've killed opponents, though. So they have explosive tendencies, but the teams they've played have just been that weak. Meanwhile, SMU had that weird loss to BYU. It looked like a bad loss to start the season. Then BYU finished 10-2, so it was actually one of the better losses on the season. Survived against Duke, but, I mean, this is going to be a weird game to get into because SMU, I mean, you think their strength of schedule, they're weak, but this team is good. They have good offense, good scoring, good passing offense, but their rush defense here, I think, is going to be one of the keys in this game. Meanwhile, Clemson, their offense has actually picked it up with their defense, 57th in total defense and 43rd in efficiency. Just not a Clemson team of previous years that we've seen, just absolutely dominating people. And the main advantages that Clemson would have had, they're actually very few. The amount of interceptions that they force, as well as the turnovers per possession that they force. They're actually 22nd, while SMU turns the ball over a lot. They're 100th in turnovers per possession on offense. But I think that's where the advantages for Clemson, I guess, disappear. Yards per play and adjusted points per minute, SMU is just killing it. They're 22nd in yards per play and 2nd in points per minute. So they get to the end zone, they can score quickly, while Clemson just has not been able to contain certain teams that just score quickly like that. And as well as the opponent passing yards per attempt and the adjusted pass rating, that means that they have good pass coverage and they have good pass rush. SMU is really good at defending the pass, while SMU is also really good at getting to the quarterback. Clemson is not good at the offensive side in either of those two categories. And as well as their rushing yards per attempt and the yards added per attempt, Clemson just does not have good pass defense or rush defense, and I think that's going to be one of the keys to this game. The only thing Clemson's good at, like I said before, is that category, but SMU, I think, in the end, will win this game, and I think they're going to go to the playoffs at 12-1 and get that first round bye out of the ACC. Big Ten Championship, Oregon 12-0 facing surprise Penn State at 11-1. Who would have thought Penn State, after that weird loss to Ohio State a month ago, would be in this position? But here we are, and they're getting back to the first time since 2016. Oregon getting here in their first ever year in the Big Ten Conference. I think this is the highest ranked matchup, I think, in the Big Ten Championship game. The only one that came close was 2015 with number 4 Iowa and number 5 Michigan State. I think that was I think no other ranked matchup has ever been that close. So this is the biggest one by far. Penn State had the Tier 1 loss to Ohio State, as we said, and they had a Tier 1 win over USC on the road about midway through the season. They should have lost that one, but that team responded well and pulled out a win from a game that they should not have won. Meanwhile, Oregon has the big wins over Ohio State, and they have another Tier 1 win. I have to see what their stats are. But either way, they're 4th in record strength, as well as Penn State's 15th. 29th strength of schedule for Oregon, while 84th for Penn State, one of the weakest in Power 5. But again, that's the name of this game for some of these Power 4 teams. You play a weaker schedule, you're going to get the benefit. You're just going to win more games. They have a good win over Illinois at home. They have a good win on the road. Obviously, at the time, doesn't seem like it, but at Michigan, or Oregon did. So two Tier 1 wins were against Ohio State and on the road at Michigan, while Penn State had that Tier 1 win, like I said, at USC. Good gritty win against Wisconsin on the road. So this is going to be a fun matchup to watch because, I mean, both teams are just so good in every category, surface level, I'm not even going to go over this slide because it's just, they're so even, everything, surface level. The in-depth stats, I mean, this is going to be close. This is going to be a really tough one to pick. I think the yards per play, it's kind of a stalemate. Yards per play allowed, Penn State is 5th in yards allowed, and they're 7th in yards per play. The only advantage Oregon has in this, I guess, mini category is points allowed per minute. Oregon allows the 8th fewest points allowed per minute, while Penn State is 34th in scoring. So they're a lot slower, and Oregon can slow down the game. That'll be to their advantage. Red zone offense. I mean, Penn State reaches allows the 4th fewest possessions to reach the red zone. Penn State allows the 2nd fewest red zone touchdowns in the entire country. So that's a major advantage for the Nittany Lions. And down here, the final thing we go over, rushing yards allowed per attempt. Penn State is 11th, while Oregon is actually 45th. And, the adjusted yards added per attempt, Penn State actually gains those extra yards, while Oregon allows those just a few extra yards and per rush attempt. And then finally there at the bottom, presented possessions with a turnover. Penn State does not turn the ball over, but meanwhile Oregon does not force that many turnovers. They're actually directly in the middle at 64th, while Penn State is 22nd. So seeing all these different mini categories, the game within the game, and seeing how close each of these two teams are, I think if Penn State can control the clock, they can control the rushing attack, and they don't allow Oregon to have any big hitters in this game, I think Penn State, even as a 3.5-point underdog, will win this. This is going to be a shocking pick, but I'm going to go with the Nittany Lions to cover and to win this game outright and be your Big Ten champ and have an outside chance of getting the number 1 seed. But that will depend on the SEC Championship, the final game we go over here, between number 2 Texas and number 5 Georgia. They're both 1st and 5th, respectively, in the power ratings. So obviously these two teams met earlier in the season. Like you see there, Texas is 2nd, Georgia is 5th. They have the record strength here. Texas is 3rd, and Georgia actually has the toughest record strength. You know, they're 10-2, but they've played the 28th rated strength of schedule, and they played 6 Tier 1 teams. Teams are rated inside the top 25, and they face both the number 1 offense and number 1 defenses on the other side of the ball that they face the entire season. So that just shows how tough these opponents that they've played. And that's what, 6. They faced 9 other 12 opponents been inside the top 50. So that's just a brutal schedule for the Bulldogs, and why they come away with 2 losses here. They had that epic comeback against Alabama that was actually, thwarted in the final seconds when Carson Beck threw a pick. And then they had just that bad loss to Ole Miss, second weekend in November in the monsoon. But they rallied back, beat Tennessee, got to the SEC Championship game because some other teams lost. Meanwhile, you see there on the left, Texas' only loss was to Georgia. And looking at this, this breakdown, Texas obviously is a defensive-led team. They're 1st in defensive efficiency overall, 3rd in total defense, 2nd in scoring defense, 7th in rush defense, and number 1 in pass defense. And looking at the other side of the ball, it's actually shocking that Georgia is not even in the top 10 in any of these categories. They've had one of the greatest defenses of all time in 2021 and 22, and then not even 2 years after that, they've just kind of been mid. And I think the keys to this game for either team to win, I think what happened last game here, let's go over what we do know. Georgia had 3 or 4 possessions that started inside of Texas's 35-yard line because they threw, I think, 3 picks. They had 1 fumble and 2 picks, I think Quinn Ewers had. And that's why Georgia jumped out to a big lead. I think it was 20-0 at half. And then, Texas scored a couple touchdowns where Georgia pulled away ultimately to make it 30-15. I think Texas's keys to a rematch victory will be to, reverse the script. Some of the advantages Georgia have here, they actually get to the quarterback a lot better than Texas allows sacks. They're 35th, Texas is 62. And Texas, as I said before, they just have so many possessions with a turnover. They do have a lot of possessions, for a team that actually doesn't not an explosive team, but they just turn the ball over so much, as well as Georgia. They're not good, but they definitely have an advantage in how much more turnovers they force versus what Texas allows. So that's an advantage for Georgia. But I think the biggest advantage that Texas will have is, yards per play allowed. They're 1st. Yards points allowed per minute. They're second. Possessions of the percent of possessions that reach the with points is first. They allow fewer than 20% of the opponent's possessions to end in points. That's crazy. 1 out of every 5 possessions is in points, and they're number 1 in their opponents also reaching the red zone per possession. So that is a huge advantage for Texas, and I think that's something they're going to have to do. And, you know, as we see here, the biggest, I think, advantage that Texas will have in this one would be the opponent's pass yards per attempt. Texas is first, allowing that. Georgia's 34th in offense. The amount of possessions that they force, Texas is 4th, while Georgia is actually pretty bad. They turn the ball over 56. And the pass rush rating. A lot of times that they get to the quarterback, Texas is 15th. And the amount of pass attempts they get that cause an interception, they're second. They allow the second fewest amount. That means every 18.6 pass attempts for the opponent is an interception for Texas. Meanwhile, Georgia is 71st in that category in offense. Carson Beck has just been throwing too many interceptions. I think he had 0 interceptions the first 4 games. Ever since then, he's had 15, which leads the nation, obviously. And final category there, rushing yards allowed per attempt. Georgia has just not been good at running the ball, and Texas has been absolutely stout at now not allowing any rushing yards. So the keys to this game, basically flip the script for what happened in the last game. You have to force Georgia to pass the ball. And when they pass the ball too much, Carson Beck is prone to a turnover. And when he's prone to turnover, or throw the ball, Texas is prone to get a turnover. If they can get turnovers in this game, if they can force Beck to throw a lot, because he's a great quarterback. He's so hot and cold though. You want him to throw some interceptions, get him off his feet. Then they're going to have to try to run the ball, and Texas is good at running the defense there. I think Texas has a really good chance of getting their revenge in this game and winning the SEC Championship in their first ever spot in their first ever season in the Southeast Conference. And I think because Penn State has a chance of upsetting Oregon, I think Texas will win this game, and they'll get the number 1 overall seed coming out of championship game weekend and into the first round of the playoffs.